A few years ago, if I'd said you could learn a bit about the Economic Club by Googling its name, or that you could get a sense of our guest's background by reading his entry in Wikipedia, or that you could find out some of his company's views by reading their official blog, you might have thought, what language is this Yahoo speaking? I know, pretty bad, wasn't it? The world has changed dramatically in the last few years, and our guest tonight, Dr. Eric Schmidt, has been one of the principal architects of that transformation. He received his PhD in computer science from the University of California at Berkeley and began his career as a researcher at Xerox's Palo Alto Research Center. I should say the famous Xerox's Palo Alto Research Center, where things like the mouse, the laser printer, the local area network, the precursor to the Windows operating system, and the personal computer were all invented. He joined Sun Microsystems in 1983. There he led the development of Java and defined their internet software strategy as the company's chief technology officer. In 1997, he took the top job at Novell and led that company's strategic planning, management, and technology development. For the past 5 years, he has served as the chief executive officer of Google, running the company in conjunction with its two founders. One of his first goals at Google, which he joined exactly a year after the internet bubble burst, was to strengthen the company's business model. He monetized their search engine and expanded into dozens of additional areas. Last year, Google grossed more than $6 billion and had earnings of almost $1.5 billion. And the company continues to expand rapidly. Every week they buy a new business and they hire another 100 people. Google's stock trades at around $410 a share, and the company has a price-to-earnings ratio of about 82, giving it a market cap greater than $120 billion and making it one of the most highly valued companies in the world. Google has risen to the heights of success with what is perhaps the boldest mission of any large company ever: to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Not just information on the web, and not just for people with PCs on their desks, all publicly available information accessible to everyone in the world. And they remain anything but conventional. The company's motto is famously, "Don't be evil." And their 2004 annual report begins as follows, quote, "Google was born in 1998. If it were a person, it would have started elementary school late last summer, around August 19th, and today it would have just about finished the first grade," end quote. And that part of the report ends with a simple statement that ought to make Google's myriad competitors, both present and future, very nervous. It says, "We're just getting started." Google's success has led it straight into the heart of many of society's most contentious debates. The company has clashed with the federal government on the issue of privacy, been sued by publishers because they were building an online searchable database of all the world's books, and struggled with how to approach China and its 30,000 official internet censors. All of which is fair game for discussion today, as we are truly fortunate to have Dr. Schmidt here to talk with us about his company. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Eric Schmidt, the Chief Executive Officer of the only company represented here today whose name has become a verb.
That was very, can you all hear me? That was extraordinarily generous. And I had the privilege of talking before this group about 7 or 8 years ago when I was the CEO of Novell, and I've always wanted to come back. I had such a good time, and I was so impressed with both the quality of the people and the quality of the questions and the quality with which you all conduct business. What I wanted to do today is, rather than give sort of the Google standard pitch, which you can read basically in the newspapers every day now, it seems, is talk a little bit about the future and how it's going to affect all of us. And I mean both as individuals and as parents and also as business people. And I have some questions and I don't have the answers, and I figured you could help me with them as we talk through this. Why has the internet taken off so fundamentally? It's not because of all the money that's invested. It's not because of all the wacko things that happen. It's fundamentally, in my view, because the internet is the best invention yet from humankind that enables the most basic of human needs, self-expression. It's literally different than anything we've been able to do before. And what I see over and over again is people talk about the internet in a hindsight kind of way without understanding. Oh, you're getting a really good feedback? How are we doing on the feedback? Better if I also try this one. Does this work? Should I try this? Better? Okay. You know you're in trouble when your applause is for not ruining the hearing of your audience. Anyway, this notion of self-expression is fundamental. And I've been thinking about how will people spend their time online? What is driving this amazing phenomena, and how will it change our worlds going forward? So we're moving into the next stage of the internet, and I want to give you some of the facts as they're playing out. It's driven by Moore's law. It's driven by all these new handheld devices. Does anybody here not have a cell phone on them? You see my point? I don't bother to ask if everyone has a cell phone on them, right? In some audiences, everyone has their cell phone, their BlackBerry, the Trio, and their computer in case the other three fail. Handheld devices, right, of which there are going to be an infinite number, and they're actually going to probably work together. The internet itself and the connection of the world together, and then this whole notion of what I want when I want it. And I've been struck by how fundamental that is. People don't wait to go to the store anymore. They want it now. They want it the moment they get it, even if they don't really need it. It's something about the way we're wired. It's something about the way the world works. And so this digitization of everything that has been going on for some time is going to continue for a very long time. Moore's law can be understood. It's roughly doubling every 18 months. It's better to express it this way. Things will improve by a factor of 10 in 5 years. So in 5 years, things will be either 10 times more powerful or 10 times cheaper, or some ratio between the two, except for the things that are changing faster. Turns out wireless bandwidth is happening faster. It turns out that disk drives are roughly going even faster, roughly doubling every year. It's frightening. I don't know how they make any money, and in many cases they don't. And this leads to these very large markets. The internet is estimated to have more than 1 billion users. And you go, wow. Well, by the way, that means that 5 billion or 5/6 of the world don't have the internet. We are way behind. Interesting statistic last week that the number of internet users in China just surpassed the number of internet users in the United States. By the way, we're not going to catch up. Okay? It's not going to happen. Get it out. I know you want to. I know everybody wants to. We're not going to catch up. They beat us. Is that good or bad? And by the way, the Indians will beat the Chinese in about 15 years. So we're rooting for the eventual winner, I guess. The Indians are growing faster than the Chinese in terms of population growth. So my point here is that you can build these businesses of enormous absolute scale. And what Google is attempting to do at some level is be as ubiquitous as brushing your teeth. Or pick a more favorable example if you don't like that one. And there are these bizarre problems in the internet, which I want to describe them as paradoxes. And let me give you an example of a paradox. Being lonely in a city is a fundamental paradox, because you're surrounded by people. Well, we have a situation where on the internet the truth emerges much faster, but there's much more inaccurate information. And by the way, everybody is shocked by this. Because you only want the first part. You only want the truth to come out faster. You don't want all the crap to come out faster. It's a paradox. You have more globalization. You have these amazing stories of collaborations across cultures and people helping out, and the most wonderful things about humanity. And then you also have more tribalism. Evil groups finding each other on the internet and doing evil things against other good groups. The internet becomes more cosmopolitan. It also foments more hate groups. That's another paradox of this bizarre journey that we're all now going through. And what it leads is this interesting lifestyle change. It's called continuous partial attention. No one is ever actually paying attention to anything anymore. Folks here have teenagers? They never paid attention to their parents in the first time. Okay, well now they've got a really good excuse. They've got their computer, their iPod, and they have 8 different instant messaging sessions, which are organized in a hierarchy that only they can explain. There's their best friend, there's their other best friend. This friend is talking about that friend, and these guys are all in this social chat room. Just ask them. There's a map, they've got it in their head. And by the way, they're doing this while they're also doing their homework, which is a separate issue. So what happens in this model is that you have an opportunity for some very, very interesting and disruptive business models. And what has happened, and to get to sort of the Google examples, existing businesses have a lot of trouble adapting to this because it's really a different modality. And I can give you lots of examples. If you think of scarcity creating value and abundancy making things free, then it's easy to understand why the telephony business is so difficult, because bits are becoming so much cheaper so often. And so the things that used to be expensive become free. One of the things that's most interesting that becomes more scarce is people's attention, because there's so many people trying to get at you. And we've not quite figured out how people are going to price their attention, but think about the number of people who are trying to reach you in every hour, and I'm excluding spam, which is one of the worst things in the world, right? So you get a situation where you have things like a DVD, which we understand. It's a very disruptive product, but it has a similar business model to the movie industry. And then you have Napster come along, which is a different way of consuming music, but it's also a disruptive business model. And that also happens to be illegal, but that's a separate discussion. The fact of the matter is it's very difficult for existing businesses to do that. And so Google is one of the companies, and some say the leading company, that's leading a shift in advertising. And that shift is a fundamental shift from untargeted to targeted advertising. And I want to explore that with you in a minute. Anybody here ever been an encyclopedia salesperson? This gentleman? Not a growth area. Right. People are using Wikipedia now, as we talked about before. And I want to talk a little bit about how that will play out. But what's interesting about these businesses is that they are network-based businesses where the race is for the whole market, and they happen very quickly. So one of the characteristics of businesses as they go forward is that they will happen quicker and quicker and quicker. So if Google took 7 years to get to our current good performance, the next one will be 5 years, the next one will be 3 years, and then God knows who'll be running those things. They'll certainly be a lot younger than I am. So in content and advertising, we see now let me ask you a question. Folks here, everybody here read the paper today? Many of you, I would assume. I read the paper. Anybody remember any of the ads? How many, yes, what ad do you remember?
I remember Bergdorf Goodman ad.
She remembers the Bergdorf Goodman ad. Were you thinking of purchasing something?
No, just longing for it.
Longing for something, okay. How many ads do you think were in the paper? Probably maybe 100, couple hundred? Don't remember all the other ones. Anybody, do you remember all the classifieds? The lady next to you remembers all the classifieds. She's scary, right? My point here is that, and not to belie the newspapers because they're very important, it's just so much more efficient when you decide to purchase something at Bergdorf Goodman to show you the targeted ad. And my guess is that you're in market for things which are predictable, right? Women are more likely to buy women's things, men's things, and men, et cetera. You get the idea. California's a little different, but my point here is that the targeting of ads makes sense. People watched TV last night? Most people do. Anybody remember any of the ads? How many minutes of ads did you all watch last night on television?
TiVo, right through them.
TiVo? Cheating. Okay. You see my point? This is a really serious problem, and these are fine businesses that are under attack because their models are going from untargeted to targeted. Let me give you a story. We have and I actually want to read this, if you excuse me. We have we have a customer here in Chicago named June Barnard. And she runs a very interesting business. She grew up in Chicago. And she bought a store. As she grew into adulthood, she bought a store she always thought was sort of entertaining. It's a business which she's named after herself that sells fake food. Very interesting. So she bought this business. She thought, well, how should I market my fake this and fake that and so forth? 5,000 catalogs a year. Not very much revenue. So her daughter told her to purchase on Google the keywords fake food, artificial food, and baked vegetables. Right? And all of a sudden, people started buying them around the world. Now, she started with 10 keywords, which we sell, and eventually bought many thousands. Her revenue grew to many, many thousands a month, and now it's a multi-million dollar business. Google changed my whole buying strategy. No longer was I inventorying a dozen of fake things. Now I have to go deep in it. I used to think that someone called and asked for 2 or 3 of them, it was good. Now I get calls for 40 to 100 of something. We recently sold fake waffles and toast to Tiffany and Company. Thousands of pieces. They would never have found me if it wasn't for Google. That's the power of Google. That's the power of Chicago's industry. My point here is, and by the way, who knew this was the business that you all would excel in? My point here is that these are new businesses that are targetable worldwide. And what's interesting about her customers is they're not from here. They're all around the world. And the same story, by the way, applies to the people who make this very special set of quilts in the Congo. I had a friend who started this, and I talked to him about it, and he said, oh, my wife makes quilts. And so I said, okay, why don't you try it out? So what you do is the particular quilt she makes is a very, very special one. And this particular quilt, you advertise, it has a specific name, and she bought the keyword for that, and he put in his credit card, and it cost him $50 to purchase the ads. And he calls me up and he says, great, I've got 100 customers. And I said, this is tremendous. I mean, this is great. And he said, there was obviously a problem. And he said, well, unfortunately, my wife only makes 1 a year. Okay. So I said, so what's the problem? He said, you're never going to get more than $50 from me. My whole life production has been purchased. So it's interesting, right? So my point here is that this category of internet marketing is actually taking over and growing at this tremendous rate. Next year, most estimates have that the internet marketing will exceed cable advertising dollars. In 2009, estimates are that the internet advertising will exceed radio advertising. Now, the total advertising market is $600–700 billion worldwide, growing at roughly GDP. But the one that's growing fastest is internet. And it's growing fastest because of this targeting. So I can give you example after example. We built a product called Adsense for content, which you can look at. And what this does is people write documents and websites, and then we show ads against our computers read the sites, and they show ads that are targeted to that particular content. And so there was a particular fellow there's a particular kind of fly fishing that this guy was an expert at, and he loved to write about it. And his day job was he repaired potholes in Boston for the state group that repairs potholes. And he started doing this, and he put our ad system in it, and the revenues to him have been so great, he's been able to retire and devote his entire professional life to working on this particular kind of fly fishing because he's so good at it. And of course, Boston potholes have gotten worse. It's an amazing shift when you think about the impact that it has on people. So let's keep going. My point here is that internet advertising and targeted advertising in general is more than the next big thing. It is the big thing. And that's a change that will affect all of us for many years. You were talking about TiVo, right? Think about targeted TiVo ads. Think of all the things that you can do. So the next thing that happens is user-generated content. Anybody here used MySpace or Facebook, any of those products? You know what they are? If you have a teenager or a college student, you do know. College students today don't seem to use traditional phones. They don't seem to use email. They don't even seem to use instant messaging. They use their face wall. And they live in a community of self-expression. They say what they think, or they say, and they masquerade as other people. And some of it is quite alarming, by the way, speaking as a parent. The important thing is it's a new form of expression. The sum of the activity on the internet on those sites is now greater than the sum of any other activity, the sum of them. So while we're here locked in traditional land, email, cell phones, and so forth, the next generation, if you will, the gap, the generation gap, if you will, is really about how people use these new forms. And it has a lot of implications for how people will consume things. So for example, as an advertiser, doesn't it make sense that you want to have your advertisements in the same place that your now young person's attention is? Well, how are we going to do that? We're still working on that. It's an interesting problem. What we do know is that internet time is under-monetized. Most surveys indicate that the time spent on internet from an advertising perspective is not nearly as valuable, it's not being advertised enough and generating enough advertising dollars compared to traditional medium, which indicates there's a lot of upside even in revenue in the internet space. So it's probably the case that the thing that will roil us next, right, if you think about this very kind introduction, is something related to these social communities and how people live on them. And I want to explore that a little bit. You have, for example, a paradox. You have infinite trackability and infinite privacy. And you have these very interesting problems. You have these evergreen stories, which are terrible. You know, teenage girls being stalked on the net, criminals trying to steal your money using phishing and other kinds of approaches. This is the norm, not the exception. The problem is not going to go away. We need to figure out ways of addressing it and fixing it. These are certainly terrible things. But my point is that kind of user-generated interaction, this life online all the time, is here to stay. And it's going to affect all of us, and I want to explore that for a few minutes. Now, if you think about the structure of businesses, the internet is almost the perfect way of doing it because there's no barrier to entry. Anybody can hang out the equivalent of their shingle. Anyone can masquerade as a large retailer or as a large inventor or whatever, and try their hand at their services and their differentiation. The mobile business is moving more and more to that as mobile phones, which used to be very walled to, in their own little communities, now get internet browsers. People are doing internet advertising on them and others. It makes sense that eventually much of the subsidization of your telecommunications should come through the fact that you're willing to work with advertising and other subscription forms. Again, a very different model of how people consume information. How does this apply to public policy? Well, it's going to have a big impact on us, I think. And I don't think that politicians, I don't think our leaders, I don't think that we've agreed as a society on how to handle all of this. And I want to give you some examples. There's a very famous experiment done in 1830 where a fella, at the time there were contests about estimating the weight of cows, right? And experts would say this is the weight of the cow, and then there would be a prize and so forth. So this particular test was done, asked the crowd as a whole to estimate the weight of the cow. And in every case that they ran this, the estimate was more accurate than the experts. It seems bizarre. So this test has been repeated many, many times. It turns out that as much as we love legendary investors, groups of people make predictably more accurate investing decisions than individuals. It turns out it's true over and over and over again. It's also how Google is run, by the way. It's hard to find out how the decision gets made, but somehow the crowd makes the decision and a better decision is made. So what does all of this information, what are we going to do with all this information that everyone is generating all the time on the internet? Well, hopefully we're going to use it to perform better decisions. Let me give you an example. Folks here have undoubtedly bought and sold houses. And the way that works, as you know, is you consult a real estate agent. You want the highest price possible. The real estate agent typically says, you're a little high, but we'll try it. And in a rising market, you end up getting it. In a declining market, you get really upset. Let's imagine the following experiment. Let's imagine that in a particular part of Chicago, everybody agrees that the 40 real estate agents will all estimate what they think the house will be worth. And furthermore, their estimates are published on the web, and their sum estimate is published. And then the buyer and seller then have a more informed decision. What would happen? Would the market get better or worse? Is this a market that benefits from more accurate information, which I believe that the scenario that I described, or is it a market where the inefficiency of the market, the fact that people don't sell their houses very often, people don't buy houses very often, does that lead to better profits for some of the intermediaries? It's a very interesting question. We know that in highly liquid markets, when everybody has accurate information, you get very accurate pricing strategies. So the housing example I used just to make the point, it would never occur to you to actually do that, right? But it's possible now to do other variants of that. When you, in your business, you bring out a product, no matter what happens with your product, a whole group of people are going to sit there and talk about it. Because they're going to say whether they like it or they hate it. So why don't you figure out a way to bring them into the tent earlier? Why don't you give them credit for inventing the product or sharing it? Why don't you find a way to test your ideas with them? In fact, why don't you ask them to design the product and build it, and then they'll be at least morally compelled to buy it? You see what I'm saying? It's a very different way of thinking about how you do your pricing. So, for example, Google, we don't price things. In our case, we run auctions. The keywords that we sell are priced in an auction, and we don't set prices. So if our revenue goes up because prices went up, it's the crowd. And in our case, fortunately, they have been going up. But if they went down, we would say it's the crowd. We'd be a lot less happy, but fundamentally it would be presumably a better decision, a more accurate decision than any of the other things. It's very bizarre to be in a company where there's no pricing committee. There's no product planning committee that sets prices and this is what we're going to charge and so forth. We let our customers decide. So is it possible to really run the world using all the people and lots of information? Well, you could imagine a situation, you have to be careful with this because you could have extremists. You can have extremists who sort of, if you will, stuff the ballot box. So if you could figure out a way to make sure it's one person, one vote, and furthermore, you could figure out the likelihood of those voters in the sense of people you're consulting being relatively accurate, you could, in fact, let the crowd make the decision. You could ask people the major public policy questions about war or public policy or whatever, and ask them, rather than have this very hierarchical notion of, in our society, the mayor, the governor, the president, sits in their office and makes the clear decision and we move forward. In fact, a better decision is made in a consultative way with a crowd. You would never do that without the tools to actually get accurate information, and you can do it now. Could you, for example, study the stock market by looking at all the stock discussion forums and then predict whether the stock market is going to move? People are trying to figure that out now because there's enough information. So my point here is, we don't know what this new model is going to do, but we know it's going to be very big. It's an always on, always connected, always seeking, always commenting model. It's very different from a television model, where the programmers, in the classic sense of programmers, decide what the programming is, and then after 6 months people do it. It's much more instantaneous. In Google Video and in many other examples of this online, people are putting up videos and the feedback is immediate as to whether people like them or not. And they create buzz and people send them around and so forth. It's a different way of being popular. And people are now trying to figure out a way to make money and build real businesses on that. So what are some of the bizarre things that you could do? Well, here's an example. Those of you running businesses know that one of the key things you have to do is generate sales leads. You actually have to go out and figure out who wants to buy your product. Well, couldn't you build a product that would look over the web and guess and figure out what people are likely to want to buy in the first place, and then get your salesperson more productive? They're saying, well, here's a whole bunch of sales lead that we think based on analyzing what everybody said all the time, all the time. So you go, well, but my sales guy does that right now because he uses the web and he looks. But I can assure you he's not looking everywhere in the world. So one of the characteristics of this is that every business becomes a global business, and every business has to be aware of where the demand curve is. So you have a combination of pressure to be global, and then you also need the tools that provide you that. Now that tool is not built yet, but it seems to me it'll come. And remember, one of the things that's happening is that the rate at which the user-generated content, all of this information that Google and others are indexing is coming out, it's essentially unstoppable. So however overwhelmed I feel or you feel about the amount of information that floats around, imagine 5 years from now when it's 10 times more or more. And you know, the idea of sort of turning off the TV doesn't work anymore because it's around you all the time. It makes sense that advertising will become both more personal and much more video-based. So there's a lot of reasons to think that video, not the video that we grew up with on television, but shorter and more targeted videos happen. So here's an example. I arrive in Chicago, I turn on my cell phone, and my cell phone says, Eric, 1, you're in Chicago. 2, it's lunchtime. 3, the pizza that you like is on the left. The hamburger place is on the right, and you had hamburger yesterday. Okay. You think I'm joking. How would that happen? Well, the cell phone has a GPS. Cell phones know where they are. There's enough computing power in the cell phone, plus it's a highly personal device. We already established that everyone here has one. And by the way, you have it for things like safety or because you can reach your family or so forth. You didn't realize that it was a navigation and interruption and advertising device that will eventually show videos of the pizza from the pizza place. And it's very important that this cell phone have an off button, by the way, for precisely that reason. So when you look at your, and I should say that even if you don't believe the claims I'm making now, understand that in the next couple of years, and by a couple of years I mean 18 to 24 months, is a huge new overbuild happening of wireless networks based on a standard called WiMAX. And WiMAX, for our purposes, is multi-megabits, which is enough to support real-time video and audio while you're both stationary and roaming. And it's going to be deployed in the major U.S. cities, including this one, as quickly as you can imagine. When you look to the future, I want you to look to your children. So I want to take you through that, and then maybe we can come and get your questions or comments. And obviously, I can talk a lot more about things at Google and so forth if you're interested. Video, audio, instant messaging while eating dinner and talking at the same time. I'm not sure this is good. I don't think there's going to be a difference between a friend here and a friend around the world. A friend of mine from college happened to be at Stanford and came by to visit. I saw him and we connected. Our appointment was made through his mail server in Canberra, Australia. Neither of us mentioned it. Didn't occur to us. It's so connected now. It's obvious that the iPod or devices like iPod will literally have all the world's knowledge. I don't know what that will do to teaching when the student has in their iPod literally, or iPod equivalent, the answer to every question. One day an executive at Google, in the early years of Google, got up and made a statement that didn't sound right to me about the law. So, and I'm the CEO, they're sitting there, we're all sitting around, and all of his staff are there. And so I typed in the query, and I saw the wrong answer. Then I faced an interesting question. Do I correct him and embarrass him? Or do I wait and discuss it later? And I made the right decision, which was, of course, to wait. A politician that I know walked in and said, did you know how politicians are, did you know that there are more TiVos than outhouses? TiVos, there are more TiVos than outhouses. Did you know this? You bought your TiVo? This is sort of the amazing thing about TiVos. There are more TiVos than outhouses. Now, I thought, this is the kind of question that I, as the CEO of Google, just should be given all the time. And so I said, no. And he said, why don't you check? Well, it turns out that there used to be more outhouses than TiVos. The growth rate of outhouses is minus 2%. Let me give another example. What is the single most important query you could ever give to Google? I have an opinion. How long will I live? Seems like a reasonable question. So in my case, I did this query. And it came up, and there's an age calculator. It's first answer. So of course, I said, I'm feeling lucky because I want to live. So it comes up, and I fill in my particulars, and it says 67. I go, this is a terrible answer. Can I get another result? So in playing with the calculator, I changed it in demographics and the fact of survivorship bias and so forth and so on, and it came up with a much more reasonable age of about 85. So I calmed down. And then I plotted the next 45 years of my life. Is that interesting information to know? I think it is, actually. Keep going. It's obvious that we should be able to do automatic translation. Google has built a product, which we've talked about publicly. It's about to be released that does language-to-language translation without a dictionary. The demo that we do is English to Arabic for obvious reasons. And it's more accurate than anybody except the experts. Can you imagine if everything written in every language gets translated into everyone? It's got to be positive. Maybe it'll make us more upset. I don't know. But think about it from a global perspective. It's obvious to me that our children will have an infinite memory because they'll have records of everything they did in their entire lives. One, you took all those digital pictures, which they're going to keep, but they're amassing this at an enormous rate. You can imagine a product called serendipity. You're writing a paper, and to the level it says what you should be saying instead. So you say, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was, founded in 1939, and it says, no, you idiot, it's 1942. So an even better one is paper lengthening. You give it a paper, and it lengthens it by 10%. Right? This would be very useful. And obviously, you could do it recursively. People are already using phones as banks. Right? What happens when a person takes a picture and puts it and uses the phone to transmit the picture, and then you can purchase that object that they're taking a picture of and ship it around. Phones that should suggest what you should be saying. Right? Google happens to have people working on speech to text. You could imagine we could listen, with your permission, generate the text, read it, decide you're wrong, and say, no, that's false. Maybe this isn't such a good idea. I don't think this audience likes this product. It's obvious, if I think about 5 years from now, 2010, it's obvious to me that we'll be able to say something, which I'm going to call truth prediction. We're going to be able to say what probability we think what this thing is true or false. We won't be able to say whether it's true or false, but we'll be able to say with probability whether it is. Probably pretty interesting. If you imagine Google in an iPod, right, and people carrying these things around, people all of a sudden will know an awful lot more, and maybe they'll actually have time to enjoy their lives because they won't be reading all this other stuff and trying to memorize it and so forth. Or maybe they'll become so obsessed with their iPod and Google and so forth. And I'm not promoting an iPod product here. I'm just using it as an example because everybody understands it. Maybe they'll change their behavior as well. Maybe they'll become more insular, or maybe they'll become more extroverted. I don't know. But I think that it's clear that when you think about this, and you think about the technology rate, if we go back to the very kind introduction of Google and of me, we're just at the beginning of the impact of getting everybody online with these amazingly powerful devices. And the devices, because of the end-to-end principle on the internet, because of the power of the internet, because of this need for self-expression, because of the innate goodness and curiosity of people worldwide, the world will become a much smaller place, and I think a much, much more interesting place. When the World Wide Web came out in 1992, 1993, I remember sitting in my office at Sun and being kind of bored. I sort of thought I understood the structure of the industry, technology curves, and I had this image of society of being a single and relatively monotonic society, monocultural, as defined by the talking heads of the evening news and the way in which our culture through mass media had sort of established it. One of the most amazing things about the internet is it has brought out the expression and voice of individuals, many of which I disagree with, but which are now hearable. And I'm proud to be part of that. What I suggest for you all is that this is the story that your employees, your customers, and your children will live through. I think it's a fascinating time to be alive. And in my meager list here of ideas over the next 5 years, I suspect that in the next hour, you all can think of 10 other amazing ideas of what you can do with this new generation of network services and the internet and these powerful devices that would be very, very meaningful to you and the things that you care about. So with that, thank you very much.
May I borrow that a minute? Yeah. Eric, we always have a question and answer session, and I have a quick first question that I think is probably on the minds of everybody in the room, and I have some more here, and I know you'd like to take some from the audience, so we'll do a little of both. But my first question is, if I buy the stock tomorrow at $410 a share and wait 5 years, will it be worth 10 times that? Well, you're going to answer that.
No, I'm not going to answer that question.
Now that's a conventional CEO.
No. It's a legally binding CEO.
Conventional. As a founder of Sun Microsystems and the former CEO of Novell, but most importantly as a Berkeley PhD, what is it like to collaborate with two young Stanford computer scientists like Sergey Brin and Larry Page? And how does that relationship really work in the executive suite and in the company as you guys manage it?
Well, thank you. As you get older, you begin to understand that patterns repeat, and that the experience that you had as a 20-something was not, in fact, the first time a 20-something had that experience. And those of you who have 20-somethings as children can relate to this, and everybody here has been a 20-something or is one. So what happens as you get older is that you can map what happened to you to their experience. And that has been the most fun of working with two absolutely brilliant young men who managed to repeat every single behavior pattern that I'd ever seen of any of the previous founders and technologists busy out to change the world. And so my role and the way we in fact work together is they have these brilliant visions and I throw water on them. And it's a good model, and I hope that that's true when they're my age and I'm much older. I hope that they retain that. Google is interesting because it was founded in Stanford dorm by the two young men, and they recruited their friends, and their friends were all these incredibly smart young people. And the foundation of the company in terms of the quality and the culture and the lava lamps and the balls. When I used to bring people to Google before it was well known, we would walk down the halls and I would show them all the various things we did. And I would tell them that we had to establish a policy that you couldn't live there, right? I had announced a policy that you had to wear clothes, right? We had no dress code, but you did have to wear clothes. Things that are appropriate at an age and not appropriate in a company. I can go on, but I won't. It's delightful, and I would encourage you, if you have an opportunity to work with such people, it brings you to a level of perspective and optimism. And what I will tell you, just on my high horse for a sec, it is traditional for people in their middle age, if I can make an age-related comment, to get kind of down on things. And I will tell you that this generation of young people are going to do very well in our world. Our country is in very, very good hands with this generation of people that are coming out of undergraduate school and graduate school in the United States. We should be very proud.
There was a recent story in the media that Google had hired, as it says here, high-powered Washington lobbyists. I think all Washington lobbyists consider themselves high-powered. There are obviously challenges between the commercial sector and governments, not only here but around the world in places like China. Given the "don't be evil" mantra of Google and so forth, what are your views about access to global markets, government intervention in the internet and so forth, and when will you and will you not cooperate with the rules and so forth of those governments?
You're using the word cooperation. Did you mean follow the law?
That's for them to interpret.
Yes, a couple of different questions there. Google has recently started more traditional lobbying activities in Washington, frankly because the people who are on the other side of some of these issues have been doing this for many, many years, and it's how Washington works, and it's completely legal. With respect to working with governments, one of the most important things to remember is that the governments have prisons, guns, and nuclear weapons. And so independent of your view, as to whether you like the law. Oh, do we like the law? Oh, no, we don't really like the law. One of the great things about America is that we can discuss it, but we have to follow it. And one of the great things about America is that we actually have a judicial system and a separation of powers and all that has served us well for hundreds of years. We have no choice but to follow the rules. And we were terribly, terribly attacked over our decision over China. But you can understand that ultimately we decided that we had to follow the law in China, because the alternatives are very bad, because we wanted to serve the billion people that are coming online. And that we made a decision that it was more important to serve the end users, and we were willing to compromise on some of the other principles. And that, I think, that pattern will be repeated. So as we encounter other governments whose policies are not good or we disagree with or whatever, we're going to be forced to. We have to adhere to the law, but we're ultimately going to serve the end user as best we can.
Eric wanted to take some questions from the audience, if there were any that you'd like to offer from there, and I think we probably have sufficient acoustics to shout them out. Anybody with a particular question you'd like to have him address? Yes, sir?
The policy of not doing evil, how is that determined at Google? Who decides what is evil?
A good question. When I showed up, I thought, come on, guys, give me a break. It's sort of typical attitude on my part. And we're sitting in the room, one of the early conference rooms one day, and one of the engineers, whose name, there was a proposal on the table, the engineer's name was Ron, and Ron said, "That's evil." And it was like everyone cleared out of the room and hid underneath the table. It was a way of assaulting an idea to get everybody to really think about it. And in fact, he was right, and we decided not to do that particular. It involved commingling ads and content in a way that would have violated the principles of the company. Larry and Sergey have said that "don't be evil" really refers to, it's a reminder to think about the consequences of what we do, because we're held to such a high standard by the people we serve. And so "don't be evil" is interpreted in that context. The way it really works, since the company is run collaboratively, as I described earlier, the wisdom of crowds, the major issues are debated by committee. And it's very, very rare, but if it finally gets to that, I'll make the final decision, or Larry and Sergey and I will make the final decision. But usually "don't be evil" ends up getting our employees, that now number more than 6,000 and growing rapidly, to think about what they're doing and to question the assumptions of their behavior. It served us very, very well. We've said, and I mentioned earlier, we run the company on the following principle. We want to serve our end users. If we can serve our end users and grow that, then we're largely an advertising company in revenue, we'll get more advertisers, serve those advertisers, and eventually that generates good economic returns for our shareholders. Yes?
How do you think about the fact that people fundamentally don't like to be advertised to unless they're ready to transact? TiVo's taken off, Do Not Call is up to 80, 90 million people have signed up for Do Not Call, spam filters, everyone's trying to avoid being marketed to unless they actually want to transact. How do you think that would impact the internet overall?
Well, it's consistent with what I was saying earlier, that this targeted advertising is much more useful. I have a television that I watch. I'm the only person who watches it. Why does it show me ads that aren't targeted to me? I mean, it's literally a waste of television time to show me ads of products that I would never buy. right? And by the way, my purchasing habits are really quite predictable. There's a category of things I'll never buy, a category of things I always buy. So we view advertising as positive if it's targeted. And the way we make sure that's true is that our advertisers don't pay for the ad unless the ad is clicked on. So here's another example. We let people advertise. We have all sorts of people, and you can do your own. You yourself can become an AdWords advertiser, as it's called. And so I asked this past year, what were the sort of most interesting ads? And they gave me a whole bunch of them that were on wacky things. And there was one that they'd given me and then they'd withdrawn it. And the ad was as follows. The first line said, Atlanta Skydiving Center. And the next line said, only one death this year. So I said, well, I'm not sure that's going to win any awards, but it's certainly clever. So I said to the people who did this analysis, why did you take the ad off? And they said, well, our system kicked it out. And I said, well, why? I said, no one clicked on it. So this budding, brilliant advertiser, no one wanted his idiotic ad. So he got very direct feedback. And they've not run that ad again because no one clicked on it. So that's, I think, part of the insulation, part of the guarantee that works with respect to targeted ads. Let's see, there's another question here. Yes, sir.
You talked about Wi-Fi and WiMAX, and I think yesterday you cleared a hurdle in San Francisco.
Yes.
You talked about that. Can you talk about the implications of that for Google, for the internet, and more broadly for society if we get a blanket Wi-Fi over the entire country?
Seems like it would be useful for everybody to have ubiquitous megabit access everywhere they are, right? It'd be even more useful if it were free. And it seems obvious it's a good idea. The spectrum is there, the technology is now at the point where it will work. There's a question of how to pay for it. So today, if you are a Wi-Fi user, you'll buy a subscription, and that's perfectly fine. You get a certain level of service. We believe that there's an opportunity to do advertising-supported free access. Now, it's a test. We don't know that it's true. And Google is a company that runs things by experiment. We run small teams, 3-person teams, for 3 to 6 months on every project. Every engineer is encouraged to spend 20% of their time on things of their choosing rather than what their manager wants them to work on. So the combination of all that creates this innovative culture. And the innovation that you're describing is a test. If it works, it's likely to be very successful because everybody loves free. If it doesn't work, then we'll have to try something else. You should know that the Earthlink is our partner there, and it won't really start until next year because they have to go through the whole process of provisioning it. But eventually, it should have a big deal, and hopefully we'll do that all around the world, and if we don't do it, somebody else will do it. There's a question over there. Yes? Go ahead first.
Traditionally, Google has links to other people's ads and websites, but recently you started answering questions yourself. When you type weather in Chicago, Google gives you the weather, which I presume is very surprising to weather.com. What do you say about your role as the provider of content instead of the conduit to the content?
It's a very good question. The question had to do with if you ask for weather Chicago, today you get what we call a one box, which actually says Google says what the weather is in Chicago, rather than showing you, and then after that are all the other choices. So we added that value. We make that decision not based on business relationships or our own personal view, but rather we test it. And the testing that we did indicated that when you type in weather Chicago, you want to see the weather in Chicago right there. You don't want to have to click anywhere, you don't have to go anywhere. And obviously if you want more information, you can click it at the link that's below there, which has a lot more information. So we do not see ourselves as a portal or as making our own content. What we see ourselves as aggregating the content and getting the answers to people very, very quickly. If we can answer your question literally in the first result so that you don't have to go in and literally do it quicker, we view that as positive, and end user tests indicate that it is. That's why we did that. There's a question over there. Yes, sir.
Will we ever see real-time images on Google Earth?
Real-time images on Google Earth. I'm sure it will be illegal. Doesn't it seem obvious that it should be illegal? Because it's too valuable. So then the next question is, well, what will the window be between real time and the delay? And that's going to be a political question. Today, so you know, Google Earth, and I of course use Google Earth to see where I'm going. So I looked at Chicago for a while. The Chicago, we have images down to roughly 2 feet from the satellite. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, go to earth.google.com, download the software, and type in your home address and look at your backyard. It is mind-boggling. I happened to check, since I wanted to see what the configuration here was in the hotel, and our images will take you down. You can even see the taxis right in front here on the river. How long are those, how old are those images? They're typically about a year. And I think if they were much sooner, people would be worried that they could be misused. And we don't want that. And they're very useful even with a 1-year expiration. A couple more. Let's see. Yes, ma'am.
Have you developed a philosophy on philanthropy?
Philosophy on philanthropy. The company has announced the creation of a Google Foundation. We've announced that we're going to spend 1% of the equity value of the company, 1% of the profits of the company, and 1% of the employees' time, with their permission, of course, on good things. We hired a fellow named Larry Brilliant, and that really is his name, who's a medical doctor who's led the eradication of many diseases. It's likely that the foundation will work on at least global environmental issues and global health issues. And they're working on that now. And I'm very excited about it. It's run separately from Google for obvious reasons. Yes, sir.
You made a comment about the high quality of the younger generation. Some commentators like Tom Friedman of the New York Times have been concerned about the United States falling behind other countries, especially in hard sciences, and a larger number of foreign students come here, subsequently return to their home countries. What's your view on that?
I think we have a choice as a country, and this is going to sound very harsh, and I don't mean to offend anybody. Think of the history of Britain after World War II with the rise of America. And it took, certainly in my childhood memory and young adult memory, Britain was seen as a place where they had a lot of interesting World War II movies and a lot of interesting castles. And it took the revolution that Maggie Thatcher and the subsequent leaders have put to take London today to be an amazing and dynamic city. It took 60 years for Britain to go from the dominance that they had globally pre-World War II, the rise of America, and now a new role, which I think is incredibly impressive. So I guess I didn't say anything too offensive there. I think it's a good story for America. The same cycle is in the process of occurring with China and India. And the quicker we recognize that these people are just as smart as we are, in some cases smarter, they have different agendas, we learn how to work with them, we don't shun them, we engage them, we talk to them, we learn where their innovations are, and we respect them, the better the world's going to be. And the quicker we're going to take our proper role as one of the dominant countries, because we're not going to be the only one. There are just too many of them, and they're too smart, and they're all on the internet. Yeah. Yes, sir. I see the question. To what degree are we ourselves homogenizing, which I was decrying earlier? It's a very interesting question. We have looked very carefully at what people look at on Google, and it's remarkably random. The world is an amazingly disparate place. Each of you fine leaders here in Chicago are yourselves very different from each other in terms of the things that you're interested in, the things that you're passionate of, and many of you are probably world's experts, and probably 2 of you are not the world's expert in the same thing. That's how diverse even this crowd is. So now look at the whole city of Chicago, the whole nation, and so forth. So we rely on that differentiation and then techniques which are generally known as link analysis, PageRank, and so forth, to rank things. I don't think Google will ever give one answer. I think we'll give the most probably correct answer. For example, I wanted to know when did daylight savings time work. So I typed that in. Google gave the answer in the little quick answer. And then there were many other sites which said the same thing. That's okay. It's okay to have one answer to when does daylight savings come. The other questions, there are going to be many, many more answers. I don't think that there's a lack of answers. Google's index is getting much larger. We're getting more and more information from around the world. We're doing more and more automatic translation. So you're going to see more answers, not fewer. And that'll give you, as an educated, thoughtful person, a better opportunity for you to make up your own mind on information. Sir, you'll have the honor of the last question.
Okay, thank you. We all know about the advantages of the information highway. One of the notable disadvantages is, for example, the avian flu. There was some publicity recently about scientists are putting on the internet the DNA for the avian flu in an effort to find an antidote, a vaccine. But they also say that terrorists, for example, have the same access to that information and can use it as a weapon. What role, if any, does Google play or can Google play in terms of either stopping the propagation of this information or filtering?
Many people I know believe that the publishing of such genetic information is a very naive thing to do. And it makes sense if you're a scientist to assume that since everyone else you talk to are scientists, plus your family and other smart people, you don't see the evil that exists in the world. And this has been a problem in science for a long time. All of us are alive today because after World War II, the nuclear nonproliferation movement, which involved an awful lot of the scientists who were upset about nuclear weapons that they had helped prepare, worked to do nuclear containment. So when science sees its own involvement in something dangerous, it eventually corrects. So the specific question you asked, which is the publishing of that information, may or may not be a good thing. The people stated their reasons. It can be debated. I think it's a matter of public policy, and for us as citizens and through our legislators, try to make a decision as whether that's a legal and ethical and moral thing. There's a lot of reasons to be concerned that such information can be misused. Google has taken a position that we do not filter or censor information unless it is directly and personally harmful to somebody. Because we can't, as a company, make that decision for you. We don't feel like we could decide, is the avian flu recipe dangerous, or because there's a legitimate argument that it's very positive to promote it. We don't have the expertise or the knowledge, and our computers are certainly not smart enough to be able to answer such moral questions. So we have to rely on the society as a whole. If such information were not legal or not appropriate, and it was clear that it would be misused, then we would take it down, but only under those situations. So anyway, thank you again. I know people say late.
Eric, thank you very much for what was a very stimulating evening. I think you've provoked a lot of thought, and you obviously come from a richly stimulating environment. Thank you for being here and joining us. Thanks.